Hello, my soccer universe. My name is Roland and this is Football Talk. And today, I promised you, we'll go to the preview of the upcoming AFCON. It is the AFCON for 2025. It starts right before Christmas and goes into the new year. It ends on the 18th of January. You would think, is this not a little bit of an odd scheduling when you call a tournament to be in the year 2025? Well, this is one of the issues. Yes, the traditional window for the AFCON has always been January. However, Morocco actually wanted to hold it in the summer, but was in a way told by FIFA that this is not going to happen. Why? Because of the Club World Cup. And so if you have a problem with the AFCON being played in January, do not blame the African Football Federation or any African team for that. No, blame FIFA. FIFA made this tournament go that way. And that's why this is called Morocco 2025, although the knockout stage portion, will already be played in 2026. But by the end of the year, we at least know who will go through the knockout stage, meaning since we have 24 teams, who are the 8 teams that got eliminated. So yeah, it's again this format that I don't know why this is still alive, and for that one you can blame UEFA, and then FIFA went with it and doubled it all up for the upcoming World Cup. And I'm getting already too polemic again because it really annoys me that we cannot have nice tournament formats again. But I do understand, at least for UEFA and for the African CAF, that a 32 team tournament wouldn't make a whole lot of sense overall. But yeah, enough of the polemic up front. This AFCON, AFCON is one of my favorite tournaments. It's probably after, meanwhile, I look forward more to the Euros than to the World Cup because the World Cup became so big and there's always some feel bad stories about it. AFCON is the complete opposite. AFCON is a tournament how it used to be. It gives you a glimpse of how tournaments were like 30, 40 years ago, where it was all about the fans. The stadiums maybe are not as modern, although in Morocco they are modern because they're preparing for a World Cup. But there's always a certain retro vibe to the tournament. Add to it the most colorful fans in the world, some of the most wonderful kids that you will ever see. Wonderful and out there. And here in the background I have a little bit of a taste of that. I don't have all the crazy kids, of course, but some of them I do. And it makes for rather gripping watching. Also, the African continent is extremely level. Almost every team that enters the tournament at least has some hope of at least making a run at the AFCON. Just remember the Gambia, who just not too long ago actually did quite well, and I think even made the knockout stage. Then we have smaller nations like Equatorial Guinea that made it far, and in 2012 we had Zambia beating the Cote d'Ivoire in a final to finish one of the more feel-good stories that the AFCON ever dished up. Of course, they are the big nations, the big from West Africa, the big from Northern Africa, and potentially an outsider from South Africa that has been making quite some noise as of late, that should be considered the tournament favorites. But with the tournament favorites, it's always, and especially in the West African ones, the West African giants, there's always another level in there, the fight for who will get how much money, will everything be promised, will a coach be sacked? The last time the Cote d'Ivoire, as a host nation, sacked their coach after the group stage, thinking they might actually go out, and then they just made it in, eliminated Senegal, and went all the way to the final and won that one against Nigeria. So that's another true AFCON story. I don't quite expect it this time. So let's go through it bit by bit. Let's first talk a teeny bit about the host nations, then we talk about the groups individually. Then I want to look at my model, what are the projections for the groups, and then further on for the knockout stage we'll talk about who are the favorites, and then we'll look at the first round of fixtures that start this Sunday with Morocco opening up against Comoros. The host nation for this AFCON is with a 10-year delay. 10 years, you remember Ebola and all that kind of stuff. That's the reason why the tournament in Morocco could not happen in 2015. Now it is held in Morocco, and the host cities we have 6 host cities, 9 stadiums, 4 of them in the capital of Rabat. also having the largest stadium. And curiously, Rabat is the capital of Morocco. However, it's by far not the biggest city in Morocco. So we have the host cities, Agadir in the south, Casablanca. This is the largest city in Morocco. Then we have Fez, a little bit in the inland. We have Marrakesh, another famous town. And of course, Tangier, very, very close to up there where we touch Europe. So those are the 6 host cities. As I said, we have 4 stadiums in Rabat alone. There's the Hassan and of course the Prince Moulay, and I always forget the name, Prince Moulay Abdallah Stadium, which is the latest, biggest, fanciest stadium of the entire AFCON that will also be the centerpiece of that particular AFCON, and Morocco will probably play all their games there. As for the teams that they are there, of course, we have host nation Morocco, but for me the most interesting thing is which teams are not there. There are 2 teams that have qualified for a World Cup that are not represented at this AFCON. That is, of course, Ghana, heavyweight, and the Cape Verde Islands. Quite interesting. But we have, of course, and those were the seeded teams, Morocco, Senegal, Egypt, Algeria, Nigeria, and the Côte d'Ivoire. We have Cameroon, Mali, Tunisia, South Africa, the DRC, Burkina Faso were in pot 2, then Gabon, Angola, Zambia, Uganda, the Equatorial Guinea, always an outsider that's dangerous, and Benin in pot 3, and in pot 4 we have Mozambique, Comoros, Tanzania, Sudan, Zimbabwe, and Botswana. And on the bottom of this slide you also see a little lion. That's the mascot for this tournament. Assad is his name. And we got the following groups out of that. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you see next to the groups, you also see little bars that will show you how I have found a rating for these teams. My ratings are always based on the pre-tournament odds of winning the entire tournament. Then I also use the FIFA rating and of course the ELO rating and combine them in a semi-intelligent manner. Let's put it that way. Group A, the hosts, got Morocco, got Mali, Zambia, and Comoros. It should be a group that Morocco will romp through. Mali has to be considered the second best nation in here, but Zambia is always a nation that could surprise, and Comoros, they have done, I think, in the AFCON in Cameroon, that was in 22, I want to say, they have done actually quite some damage there as well. So, it's maybe an easy group for the hosts, who will have heavy expectations on them. But, behind them, it's still open, although I would favor Mali to go through. Then, Group B is already one of the better ones. Egypt and South Africa, Angola and Zimbabwe. So, 3 southern teams, with South Africa enjoying a resurgence as of late. They, I think, finished 3rd place at the last AFCON, or was it 4th? At least they were in the semi-finals at the last AFCON. I think it was 3rd place that they achieved, and they have qualified in a really tough group ahead of Nigeria for the World Cup. And South Africa has always been kind of looked down, but their local league is getting quite strong, and the squad is mostly out of the South African league. So they don't have all the issues with preparation as well, because they can really prepare decidedly for the AFCON. And then there's Angola and Zimbabwe, 2 teams that always can do something. I mean, the rating for South Africa is relatively low, but I wouldn't be surprised if South Africa do win this group. However, Egypt have to be considered the favorites for this group, especially since it's a AFCON played in Northern Africa, where Northern Africa teams always enjoy a little advantage. And actually, I have factor this into my ratings. That's why also Morocco has a substantial rating. Group C, another one that's interesting, and here we have Nigeria and Tunisia in there. Those are the 2 favorites in that group. Uganda and Tanzania rank outsiders, and Tunisia, I would give them a half home field advantage. I mean, Morocco is not too far away, and crossing the Sahara is always a hard issue for teams that come from north to south or from south to north. And that's also the case. So I honestly, Tunisia is slightly higher ranked than Nigeria. Nigeria, of course, after the disappointment of not qualifying for the World Cup. And, there are so many issues with the federation there. There's boycotts. There are many coaches in there. And, when they got ousted by the DRC in the World Cup playoff, the comments afterwards, it was all about voodoo and not taking responsibility for your own troubles. definitely factored in there as well. Group D has probably the other favorite of the tournament, Senegal, and I never know, is Senegal a northern or southern team, because they are so much out in West Africa that, they're an in-between team, but Senegal definitely one of the top favorites, a really strong squad. The DRC is in there, Benin is in, and Botswana is there. The DRC are favorites to actually make it also to the World Cup for the first time since '74. Then it was still Zaire. And Benin is the team that actually pushed Nigeria and to a lesser degree South Africa for a direct World Cup qualifying spot. So behind Senegal, and Senegal is by far not a foregone conclusion, this could be a really tight group. Group E, Algeria should be the favorites. I mean, they're neighbors to Morocco, and yes, relations between Morocco and Algeria are not the greatest. Still, I would expect Algeria to have a really strong showing. Burkina Faso, Equatorial Guinea, and Sudan also relatively level. A lot of countries that have a heap of trouble. We know about the rebellions in Burkina Faso and the unstable situation there. Equatorial Guinea, a dictatorship that has led to actually Equatorial Guinea being a pretty good team that's always overperforming. And we all know about the atrocious war in Sudan as well, to a fact where Sudan actually did really well in World Cup qualifying. And I think they were in a group with Senegal and the DRC. So Senegal and DRC, I forgot to say that, meet again. And then holders, Group F, and that is another really open group. Again, meet a World Cup qualifying rival in Gabon, Cote d'Ivoire, Gabon, and then Cameroon in there as well. And while Cameroon might be ranked second highest there, this is because they have name recognition, so the odds are usually relatively short. But then they used to be quite good, so their ratings are still high enough. However, the federation president has actually fired the coach. The coach has declined to step down, so there were 2 squads released, and so on. It's a whole lot of mess surrounding Cameroon. And so I wouldn't be surprised if Cameroon get ousted, because Gabon, that's actually a serious team as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if Cameroon will leave after this group stage in all the trouble that they are in. So after this more personal rundown, let's look actually at what my model says, and this is based on these bars, based on the ratings. Group A, we have Morocco ahead of Mali, Zambia, and Comoros. Definitely a very clear winner for Morocco. You see they have a 99% chance of advancing to the next round and a really high, almost 75% of winning it. Mali in second place, but then Zambia and Comoros, who will be in third place, that's rather open. Egypt slightly ahead of South Africa and Angola. I actually think the model, as I already said, is a little bit underestimating South Africa, but those two should go on. And it's between Angola and Zimbabwe, and Angola is probably a stronger team. Tunisia and Nigeria, this is the only time where the pots do not translate. Tunisia, thanks to a semi-home field advantage, is expected to land ahead of Nigeria according to my model, but just by a smidgen. They could very well come down to goal difference here. And yeah, then we have to see. Maybe the strikers are a little bit more on the Nigerian side. Uganda and Tanzania rank outsiders. Group D, Senegal, DRC, and Benin. Then we flip the page. Algeria, of course, ahead of Burkina Faso, and Equatorial Guinea, again, relatively close together. Sudan, a little bit outsider, but again, don't discount Sudan. In Group F, while my personal feelings that Cameroon might get eliminated, it is Cameroon who move on, and Gabon go into this third place spot. And so if we rank the third place teams now, it would be Angola, Gabon, Benin, and Equatorial Guinea moving on. So Uganda and Zambia would leave after the group stage, groups A and C, because there's a little bit of a gap between the top and the bottom teams are probably prime candidates to get eliminated, and therefore only have 2 teams from that group. If it is really from groups B, D, E, F that the 4 best third place ranked teams would come, and if it really would end like this, then this would be the bracket that would result. And it's quite interesting to run through that one, because especially since we know who are the favorites. We would have, for instance, Mali, Nigeria, and Senegal, Gabon in the upper quadrant, where, Senegal, Nigeria, I mean, that's a pretty big matchup. Of course, Senegal would be favored to go on to the semi-final. Next quadrant, Egypt should be a favorite over Benin, and the holders Cote d'Ivoire over Burkina Faso. Egypt against Cote d'Ivoire is also something that sounds typically AFCON. due to their semi-home field advantage, you would think that Egypt would move on. But with Egypt, we never know. They have, except for the one in Cameroon, they've never been shining at the AFCON. Senegal against Egypt, I mean, that was the final in Cameroon, and Senegal won on penalties. It's all about Mo Salah, I think, this one, although Senegal are a stronger team and they should be considered the favorites up out of this upper bracket. Lower bracket, South Africa, Cameroon, that's already a big one. And yes, Cameroon will move on according to my model. However, I would say South Africa have to be favored there. Morocco, Equatorial Guinea, and then it's Morocco who will come out of that one. For the semi-final, Algeria, DRC, Tunisia, Angola. Two very clear favorites in Algeria and Tunisia who then would meet in a quarterfinal, and that one is really, really tasty. In addition, the winner of this one will play against Morocco, so all the Maghreb states kind of bunched together, and that is quite tasty. Morocco, of course, have to be considered the favorites going to the final, and therefore they would meet Senegal in a final, which in a way would be some sort of dream final, although if there was a Nigeria against Morocco, this would also be considered a dream final. I just don't see Nigeria going that far. In third place, Algeria would be favored over Egypt. So this is how a tournament is expected to pan out. I always say it looks nice when you go it with the AFCON. There are so many permutations that are possible because it's such a level tournament overall, and therefore this bracket will only last probably for the first couple of match days, if that. Furthermore, it might also make sense to look who are now the overall favorites. Well, it's Morocco. Morocco are at home. They're the strongest team in Africa. Yes, Achraf Hakimi is a question mark, but 32% chance of winning is really, really high. Potentially too high, because I think the pressure that will be piled upon Morocco will also be considerable. We also have Senegal and Algeria and Tunisia and Egypt, so all the northern African states plus Senegal, which, as I said, they're not an northern African / Arab nation, but I would bunch them in there, and then Nigeria is best of the rest. And then the rest, it can be very, very even. As I said, the tournament will be played in Northern Africa. Morocco is probably a little bit on a transition zone, so I could see that Senegal will have a good support there as well. But I would give especially Algeria, Tunisia, and to a lesser degree Egypt also a little bit of a boost, because culturally these are very, very similar places and very different from sub-Saharan Africa. The match schedule is actually made in such a way that the group heads play against the lowest seed first, and then we have the big name matchups all on second match day, so just after Christmas. And I think this works quite fine. You make a Christmas celebration on Boxing Day, we will have quite some interesting matches. But here are some really good ones. I would have to say, of course you're going to watch the opener, but of the early games, I have to say South Africa, Angola is definitely very interesting one. The same goes for DRC and Benin. Those are two teams that both can surprise and are probably already playing for a potential second spot. Then a little bit later, if I just see, Cameroon Gabon is one that really sticks out here as well. But of course, you also want to watch the other favorites, like how will Algeria fare against Sudan, Nigeria against Tanzania, or the holders against Mozambique. But as I said, it's probably these 2v3 matchups in the first round that are the most interesting ones. In conclusion, can I tell you how much I'm looking forward to the AFCON? And I've said it for every preview so far. You do not necessarily watch the AFCON for the great spectacle that will be delivered. The AFCON is usually not the nicest of watch from a footballing side of view. However, if you're just a little bit of a kid enthusiast, you will see crazy things, you will see wonderful kids, but you will also see quite some mismatch stuff and quite some weird stuff as well. You will see some of the best fans in the entire world, I would argue. You will feel a community, even though those teams don't like each other. There's always this, yes, but we are all Africa, and this is our time. This is our World Cup. This is something that I think the Euros have, not that the AFCON has. No team at the AFCON realistically has a chance of winning the World Cup. Whereas in South America and Europe, these are all potential World Cup winners. If you win the Euros, you're in a good stead to winning the World Cup, unless you're called Italy currently. But that's a whole different story. But this is their tournament. And this is the tournament where they will give it their all, where they will represent their country, they will fight for the country, but also put a light on Africa. Much needed. Africa is a much overlooked continent. A continent should have way more weight than it actually does have at this very moment. And it's so insidious that now there's this transfer between African and European nations where the European teams, if you have, for instance, look at the France team, there are so many players in there that actually could play for the African country. I mean, Mbappé has Cameroonian heritage, but the best talents are early pulled into the French, how to say, into the French section in a way. But now actually these teams look also at, for instance, I'm always looking at France there because of course France and Africa, there's a whole lot of history there. Not always pretty history. Same thing goes for Britain. But Belgium, blah, 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 Lukaku should play for the DRC if you were to ask me. But that's a different story. But what these nations are now looking for is they look at their diaspora. And they actually get some top talent from there. Brahim Diaz, for instance, is now playing for Morocco. And that's just one of the few examples that are out there. So there is an intermingling between Europe and Africa already. Do I wish that more African stars, yes, they grow up in a European system, but they would then go on to play for Africa? Yes, I would wish that. But the reality is that unless the organization in Africa becomes a better one, that these stars will look for their careers and will look for a European career to play for France or a Portugal or in England, whereas now at least these nations are advanced enough to pluck the secondary talent from the other from the top nations in Europe and make it work this way. Then there's of course Morocco. Morocco have invested heavily as of late, and they have won the Under-21 World Cup. They are producing talent on a semi-regular level already. And that makes Morocco a really interesting prospect. I fear that the pressure of being the host nation and being the overwhelming favorite in this tournament will probably get to Morocco. And I would be surprised if Morocco actually do win this one. However, going into the World Cup, the expectations will be completely different ones. And there I could see Morocco do quite some damage. But we'll get a little preview on the African teams that will be the World Cup, although two of these we will not see. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this little preview of the AFCON. I will do some semi-regular roundups. I have not really made a schedule. I would love to do after every match day a little video. But after the first match day, that's Christmas Day. That might get a little bit difficult. So let's see how it will go. Maybe I'll do just before that a little video or a podcast episode. And then we'll move on from there. But in any case, please let me know, who is your favorite to win the AFCON? Will you be watching? I sure will be watching, probably more than I would have expected to watch. I'm really looking forward to this tournament. And as always, please drop a line below. Leave me a subscription if you enjoyed this episode. Give me a thumbs up. And one thing is for certain, I will talk to you soon about more things in my soccer universe. Bye!